welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World. I am your host, Jessica, and joining this week, we have Ben Alexander here to talk about Ironheart. Ben, thanks so much for coming on and joining us.
It's great. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited to get to talk to you about this because we are in the deep, cold, dark depths of January, and this is such a cozy, wonderful game, so I thought it was great to start the new year with. And also it's a solo game, and if anyone else is pretty partied out after the holidays and socialized out, a solo game sounds great to me right now. So I'm so excited to hear more about it with you. Before we dig into that, though, I will be nosy and talk a bit about you, Ben, as I always do with guests. So I'll start with the classic question of, do you remember the first role-playing game that you played?
I do, yes. It's probably quite a boring answer given the subject matter of the chat, but D&D 5e when I was at university. Yeah, just one of my friends invited me to like a party to play it, and that was probably about 10 years ago. And then kind of started out with that, then jumped to the Star Wars RPG. I can't remember what it's called, and then kind of spread out to a load of different indie games from there. But yeah, nice. So it's just the kind of cookie cutter kind of way in.
No, D&D is the biggest tabletop game out there, so it's not surprising that that's a lot of people's start into it. A lot of people do stay with D&D and sometimes don't spread out into other indie games. What was it that made you want to explore the bigger world of TTRPGs?
Yeah, so I mean, well, for example, tonight I'm playing D&D in a couple of hours, so it's still very much in my docket.
Yeah.
But I think it was just kind of coming to realize that there's so many other types of stories and experiences you could have. It's like if you talk about comic books, people always think of superheroes, but comics is a medium and it can be used to tell so many different types of stories that aren't just superheroes. And it's the same with tabletop games. It doesn't just need to be about wizards or dungeon crawling. It can be about any number of different things. So it's just great. It's a really, really wonderful medium and really wonderful kind of creative expression, I suppose. That can be solo or multiplayer or anything in between, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously you now create games. So what was your journey to being somebody that was a fan of playing games and trying things out to being somebody who makes games and puts them out there for other people to play?
Yeah, sure thing. So I started out my career out of university, and for a few years after that was as a graphic designer, working in motion graphics. I played a bit of D&D and stuff in the background, and one of my colleagues turns out is the partner of Barney, who is who I now work for at Parable Games. She had mentioned that Barney had a night, and his brother had an idea for a game which would become Shiver, and I'd said, I could do a bit of artwork for that, and then that blossomed into me now doing like thousands of pieces of artwork for Shiver, working with Parable Games full time. And a couple of years ago, Shiver is primarily a horror game, so I was doing a lot of horror artwork. In the kind of the depths of the pandemic, and I'd been watching a lot of anime. I've been reading a lot of different books, and I kind of had an idea that I wanted to have a go at creating something for myself, which is where Ironheart, at the time it was called Iron Core, where this came into being. Really, I kind of it started sketching things out for this, kind of coming up with a little bit of lore, a very rudimentary dice rolling system, and then that kind of slowly grew over time to the point where I sort of put together a document to pitch it to Charlie and Barney. They really liked how it looked and how it felt, and then we kind of grew from there and started kept developing it until the point last year where we had the back kick campaign, which is a massive success. So that's kind of like the truncated version of the story. There's a lot more that went into it, but that's kind of how we ended up where we are now.
Perfect. Like you say, it has a very different feel to Shiver. It's very much not a horror sort of game. So that segues us really nicely into talking about it. So what is Ironheart for those that weren't familiar with the back of kit?
Yeah, sure thing. So Ironheart is a solo RPG where you play as a pilot and a mech, who's their big robot companion, in a post-war setting called Astral Union. It's very inspired by like Mass Effect and Twilight Imperium. But in terms of the tone of the game, it's definitely a little lighter. It's not particularly dark in any way. It's a lot more cozy. And in terms of the gameplay, it's designed to be fairly rules light and accessible, especially as, you know, it might be someone's first solo role-playing game.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the idea was kind of born in the pandemic. Is that what influenced it being a solo game, or what made you choose that instead of a more traditional kind of group collaborative game?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the kind of big inspirations for this was someone who's been a previous guest on your show, Colossal, Nick Angel.
Oh yeah.
I got a chance to meet him at a few conventions, and it was at the same time when I was just being exposed to more solo games, so like Artifact, and like people playing Escape the Dark Castle by themselves. Yeah, in terms of how the pandemic influenced it, yeah, I think it definitely impacted that. You know, we couldn't really, unless you wanted to go on a Zoom call, it is quite difficult to have those kind of social gatherings. And I think a solo game is quite, it's quite appropriate for a more kind of isolated setting where you might be playing it. Yeah, and I think as well the tone of the game is really a response to that as well. Because in 2021 it was horrible. Like it was not a good time. Like for me personally as well, it was really like not great. So I think this is a more optimistic kind of view at what the future could be. Yeah, but then it's kind of then you look at where the world is in 2025 as well. Potentially still need that kind of escapism or hope.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of people will resonate with that. Let's dive a little bit more into the setting. So it's set in the Astral Union. So what is the world we're going to be exploring in the game?
Yeah, so the Astral Union is kind of like a big federation of these different galactic civilizations that have finally kind of arranged in a sort of peaceful coexistence. It's kind of like the Federation in Star Trek, or like the Council in Mass Effect. So there's a few different species. There's the Vasis, who are like reptile people, or the Urvon, who are like these giant sort of alien bears that you can play as. And yeah, it's generally it's set 50, 60 years after a big kind of existential crisis, a massive war that took place, where an invading alien force came into the universe and tried to like destroy it all. They were beaten back, and now civilization has kind of rebuilt itself. In terms of what the player will be doing, you're traveling around the outskirts of the Astral Union in the less kind of governed spaces. So it's got almost like Wild West feel, where you'll come across these like isolated settlements and towns, help people out, and occasionally fight mercenaries and things like that.
Nice. And you mentioned before that, interestingly, you're playing kind of two characters in a way, because you have your pilot and your mech. So could you talk a little bit of how that works in terms of character creation and what that looks like in gameplay?
Yeah, sure thing. So the character creation, a lot of it's generated by roll tables. So you have options. You roll a d6, and it can randomly generate them for you, or you can select them yourself. So to begin with, you create your pilot. You kind of have three main points for that, which are the pilot origin, the pilot temperament, and pilot goal. So it's where do you come from, what do you want to do, and how do you act while you're doing it. Then for the mech, it gets a little bit more complicated, where you select things like So for the pilot, it's more their kind of like their character, their personality. For the mech, it's more the physical side of things. So you know, you can almost think of the mech as like the type of class your character would be in a different game.
Okay.
So you select things like your mech's weight class, its kind of weapons it has, and what its specialization is. So in the world of the Astral Union, a lot of these mechs, because there's no war anymore, they're ex-military machines that have been recommissioned for civilian use. So you could have mechs who are like shepherds, who are like designed to like herd megafauna like giant sheep and cattle.
Yeah.
Or harvesters who are, you know, collect grain and natural resources, or bridge builders who are kind of construction units. And yeah, that's kind of the core basis of how the character creation works. It probably takes maybe like 20-25 minutes to do if you're just randomly rolling. But as the game's still in development, we're still tweaking some of the options you have there.
Okay. And what does gameplay look like? So if somebody's like, you know, played, you know, D&D or something more traditional like that, what are we actually doing when we sit down to play a session of this?
Yeah, sure thing. So the core gameplay exploration loop we have in the game revolves around kind of building an environment using random roll tables, building a settlement you create, and then starting something called the story circuits. So the story circuits are kind of like the core of the game, the gameplay mechanic. These are sort of pre-written adventures which contain multiple parts. And as you're playing through them, you can play between 1 and 6 different parts of the adventure, or you can play one or all of them. You travel between different locations, helping people and just you know, doing various things in the world. One of the examples from the quick start guide is you turn up on a kind of a small village, and the megafauna nearby, the giant mulhoodens, which are these like big 6-legged sheep, are being abducted. You need to work out what's happening, and that ends in a conclusion of you know, a spoiler for the adventure. You fight a giant robot werewolf. So and then we in the core book we'll have quite a lot of different story circuits for you to go to. In terms of the kind of the moment to moment action of that, it's a D6 system. It's really simple. Most rolls you'll be successful on a 4+, but there's lots of modifiers that can help you with that, depending on what your mech or pilot are good for. And then there's kind of like a special ability called Activating Iron Core, which you can use to help you with different things. Which the Activating Iron Core, in the lore of the world, the Iron Core is the mech's brain essentially, and it can synchronize with the pilot's mind and allows them to act in a way that is beyond both of their regular abilities. So it's almost like using superpowers. Yeah.
Nice. So this is so we'll be presented with a scenario and we'll need to roll some dice to kind of see the outcome. Is there any like writing or recording or anything like that, like you'd have in other solo games, or what does that gameplay look like?
Yeah, sure. So Ironheart, it's written as a journaling game. So the intention is, as you're doing all these things, you'd have a journal to hand and you'd be writing down what your character's actions are. Which is something we talk about in the book, how to go through that, and examples of writing, and so that the player can see how they should structure it themselves. We recommend that people play it for probably between half an hour to an hour per session, depending on what you want, but you can easily play it for longer.
Okay. Where did that recommendation come from? Is it just like in playtesting, that's when people got the best?
So yeah, from playtesting, and probably more from me than anyone else on the team is, you know, that's kind of where my my writing stamina reaches its end. And I think if you're new to solo games, that's probably I imagine quite the same for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really like solo games, but I'm very dyslexic, and so writing is not something that I like get a joy out of. So what I do with a lot of solo games is I end up recording it like on a dictaphone or something like that. Could that be something I could do with this as well?
Yeah, that would be perfect. You could totally do that. I mean, I think that's definitely something that could be really good as almost like the pilot's internal monologue, or like something they've recorded on the mech's internal kind of speech recorder. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that'd be amazing.
Fab. And obviously, are we kind of playing two characters in this? So sometimes we're writing as the pilot and sometimes as the mech, or how does that relationship of playing two different kind of beings work?
Yes, that's a really great question. So, in terms of how the book itself is written, it tends to be more skewed towards the pilot, with the mech helping them do things. However, there's circumstances in the game which we kind of reference where the pilot might be doing one thing and the mech might be doing another, where you could totally describe what their two kind of separate narratives are. But yes, within the fiction of the game, the pilot tends to be the more independent of the two. One of the things with the mechs having specializations is that when a pilot goes to do something and leaves the mech to their own devices, the mech will revert to their specialization. So if they are a harvester, if you leave a mech alone without giving it instructions, it'll just sort of wander off and start helpfully gathering wheat or something like that.
Okay, great. I love that. So I was really interested in, when I was reading through the game, obviously you're exploring the world and different places, but one of the key things that really intrigued me was that relationship between the kind of the pilot and the mech. So because in this world, is it true that mechs are kind of almost have a level of sentience, or are they more like machines, or is that something you explore and find out in your own game?
So I'd say this is one of the things we've kind of gone backwards and forwards with how the mechs work. I'd say they have potential sentience, like they do have a level of self-awareness and personality, and that's something that explicitly grows as the game goes on. Like the mech gains quirks, which are just kind of like personality traits. But they are generally programmed to be helpful to the pilot, so they wouldn't just walk away and abandon their pilot for the most part. But there are some instances in the lore where that might be the case, and that's explored more in the second book, which is Ironheart Remembrance, which is more of an expansion to the core book.
Okay, great. And you mentioned that the game is currently in development. So what sort of changes have you been going through in playtests that were perhaps surprising to you, or any big kind of changes that you didn't originally think would be there when you were first designing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the kind of the main ones that I guess this is something we'll talk about more. That'll be expanded on more in like kind of blog posts and stuff like that, but is things to do with the character creation. There's a couple of extra things that we've added in character creation that aren't in the quick start guide. So we'll have a slightly different character sheet as well to accompany those, and those are things that are specifically to do with the mech. But I don't want to say too much about those right now. But they're very
spoilers
cool.
For later.
No, spoilers for later. I think they're things that are really cool that have like big lore implications, and I think will really help with the role playing side of things. They're less mechanical details, but I think they're really key things that maybe should have been there from the start, but that is you never catch these things on the first pass.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the game has been successfully crowdfunded on BackerKit, so congratulations. So it's happening and it's in development right now. And if you missed the BackerKit campaign, to anyone watching, listening, there are pre-orders available now, so you can kind of get involved. As you mentioned, the game's in development. Do you know the sort of timeline for it? So if people are listening and they're like, I want to play that now, obviously there is a quick start version to kind of get by. But is it expected kind of this year or next year, or what's the sort of plans to put you on the spot?
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, I've just got the timeline graphic up now, so I know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the full product release, we're saying Q3 this year, so it'll be like kind of autumn time. I think that'll probably tend to be where it ends up being. But there'll be probably digital releases before then, various bits and pieces. Yeah, so but as always, as we've learned in a post-pandemic world, fulfillment logistics can be extremely can play havoc with best laid plans. So we'll have to see.
You don't have to tell me that. I do the logistics and fulfillment for EM Publishing, so I completely understand.
Yeah,
yeah.
I imagine that's a bit of a
it's a whole different game. But yeah, fantastic. So in time for Christmas, I'm going to say at the moment for next year.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Fab. One other thing I want to talk about the game is that it's very pretty. Could you talk about the visual design and elements of the game and the directions you chose for it?
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, I'm as part of being the creator of the game, I'm also the artist for it, 'cause that's kind of where my original skill set comes from. Yeah, it just came through. It was a similar thing with writing the game. It was just like a kind of iterative design process of just doing. Firstly, I knew I wanted something that was lighter in tone and kind of anime inspired. And that was kind of the jumping off point. And then it just kind of went from there. Just lots and lots of versions of what we thought the mechs in the universe could look like. And we kind of landed on this sort of Baymax-esque, like kind of big, round, gentle looking creatures. And yeah, and the kind of, we use quite a pastel color scheme in it as well. A lot of the kind of pinks and blues. I just wanted something that was gentle and quite nice, but also felt kind of grounded, I suppose. It's quite like Ghibli inspired, and yeah, I think that as well. Colossal was a big inspiration for this.
Yeah.
One of the it's really amazing another solo RPG game. But yeah, it's just lots of work, just lots of drawing and redrawing, trying out lots of different colors, and just until we land on something that I think could work.
Yeah. I loved all the pinks and pastels and that, like you say, softer element of it, because there are lots of mech RPGs out there, but this feels very different and is in a different sort of corner than this is. Because if you want to have a big, angry, smashy robot, there's definitely mech games like that out there, but this felt very different, and so it was really nice to see that kind of communicated visually, so you could look at it and see, kind of get the tone of what this game was going to be. If somebody hasn't tried solo role-playing games before, and they're looking at this and thinking maybe they want to give it a try, do you have any kind of guidance or recommendations for them when they're approaching a solo game for the first time?
Yeah, definitely. I think the main thing for me would just be setting a time limit for how long you're going to play a session. Setting a time limit and just being... just not being too self-conscious about what you're writing or what your characters are doing, if that makes sense. Because if you're not used to writing or whatever, it might be quite intimidating to kind of put pen to page and start writing things. But it's like with anything, you just got to kind of go ahead and do it, and just see what you think, and yeah, just be willing to give yourself to the fiction of the world.
Yeah. And would you
just going back? Oh, sorry.
No, carry on.
Just coming back to something you were saying before about where this game kind of fits in the mech kind of role-playing game space. Like, that was a very intentional choice. Is like, there's lots of amazing mech games out there, but none of them kind of scratch the itch of what I kind of wanted. So like Lancer, like that's the artwork and everything, that is amazing. and it is very kind of nitty gritty, like extremely kind of rules heavy game. And then you've got stuff like Salvage Union, which is, you know, one of the newer games on the market, is very kind of rusty and very tactile. And then you have things like Beam Saber and Armor Astir, which kind of like cater to the kind of more space opera side of things, which is kind of where this game lives. But yeah, I ultimately wanted something that wasn't necessarily like too violent all the time. Like like there is fighting in it, but that's not necessarily the 100% of the point of the book. And that's not a knock against any of those other systems. I think they're all really cool. But yeah, I think it's very telling that, you know, on the front cover of the book, there's no weapons, there's no you know, there's no guns or like rail guns or swords or anything like that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it really clearly, like I said before, sets the tone of the type of game that's going to be played. One other thing I was going to say is, for me, I was wondering how accessible you'd say for this is somebody that's never tried kind of games before, because I thought this could be a good gift for somebody if you're a gamer and they're not a gamer in your life, maybe something to kind of ease them in to the genre. Maybe do you think it's quite accessible for somebody that's not played role-playing games before?
I'd say so, yeah. I think certainly from the gameplay perspective, it's extremely easy. You know, it's a D6 system. Like you need maybe 2 or 3 dice, maybe a couple more. And yeah, like you could just play the game where you roll a dice and on a 4 or more, you do whatever you want. But yeah, it's designed to be very, very accessible. The writing is quite I'm not sure terse is the word, but it's not too verbose. It's very kind of like clipped and
pared down,
pared down, exactly, yeah. Which I think is a lot of the things about the book, including like the visuals and stuff as well, and like the world building. It's all very like concise. So yeah, I'd say I'd like it to. It'd be nice. I'd say it is a good entry point for people into the solo sphere, definitely.
Absolutely, great to hear. Well, I'm glad I've got my copy on pre-order. If anyone else is listening or watching, you can also get yours on pre-order, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. So the link's in the show notes and on the screen there if anybody's interested. Ben, thanks so much for coming on and talking about Ironheart. It's been great hearing more about it from you. Before you go, I would love to get some recommendations for you. You've mentioned a few games pitted kind of throughout the stream, but I didn't know if you had any specific recommendations you wanted to shout out for any other tabletop RPGs.
Yeah, sure thing. So one I mentioned earlier is Colossal, which is another kind of anime-inspired solo RPG, which is an amazing game. It uses a deck of cards to play it. And then aside from that, there's a new one that I just picked up on, I think, Kickstarter, called Dawn of the Orcs, which is very different from this. It's a collaborative tabletop RPG where you play a council of a fantasy city that's being invaded, and you've created a species of orcs, and you have to kind of guide them out into the world and send them off to battle, and you see how they kind of evolve over time. Really, really interesting concept. I've not seen that sort of thing done before. It's almost like a strategy game, but like a conceptual strategy game, where you play as Saruman from Lord of the Rings, effectively. But yeah, those are my 2 big recommendations at the moment.
Fab. I love that. And I love that they're very different as well. So they're going to serve different people for their different things they're looking for as well. Ben, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to hear more about Ironheart, and would be happy to have you or anyone else on the team back to talk about all the other games that you do at Parable Games. So thanks so much for coming on.
Lovely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And thank you to everyone who's watched and listened. We'll be back next week with another tabletop RPG to share with you. But that's all for this week. Thanks very much, and bye.